So we put it off because you hadn't finished the homework.
Basically. Well, I've now finished the homework. Isn't that better?
You're late though, so you're going to get a deduction.
What deduction are you going to put on me?
Well, when I was at university back in the day, it was it was 2% for every day you were late. So I guess that's 14% off. So you can only get a maximum of 86% on this assignment.
So no distinctions for me, or I can still get a distinction, but I have to be perfect.
Well, if it was going to be 100%, then you might just still scrape in with a distinction after the deduction. But I don't like your chances.
Welcome to The Writer and the Critic, a monthly podcast devoted mostly to books, reviews, and whatever else takes our fancy. I'm Ian Mond, and my co-host today and every other month, which is good, is Kirsten McDermott. Hello, Kirsten.
Hello, Ian.
So
I like how you said every other month as though it's only like every second month, and in between some kind of pod person comes in and pretends to be me. But it's actually me today.
The pod person is taking a break, and this is your turn. Alternate Kirsten v pod person.
Yeah.
So just curious, are you Pfizered up yet?
I am not because I forgot to ring and make an appointment.
Fair enough.
I meant to on Wednesday, and I just completely forgot because we were running around from everywhere and doing crap, and it was on my list, but I didn't get to it before 5, and then it was too late. So I will ring next week and hopefully get an appointment.
Well, there's probably only about 10 vials of Pfizer in Australia.
This is a problem. Last time I rang, I couldn't get an appointment, and then actually that's not true. The first time I rang, couldn't get an appointment. The second time I rang, I tried to ring it during lunch at work, and I was on hold for so long I had to hang up because I had to go back to work. So then I was going to try on my day off, and I ran out of time in the day. I had no idea where time is going, Ian.
No,
I've checked everywhere. I've checked behind the couch. I've checked underneath the beds. I've checked all my usual hiding places.
So you know that whole thing that there's a sinkhole at the bottom of the sea, at the bottom of the ocean? That's where time goes. That's
where time goes.
Yeah, that's sinkhole. And on that note, I'll be all Pfizered up in 9 days.
Yay. That's awesome.
So I'll be double vaxxed. So I'm taking that day off because I'm pretty sure I'll get the man flu. And I may need to take the next day off as well because, although it's 24-hour symptoms, I think for me it'll be longer.
But you were okay the first time, weren't you?
Perfect. Except your arm hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you'll be fine.
And we speak from one of the few states in Australia that's not in lockdown.
Not in lockdown. We are not in lockdown, people. We still have some restrictions, but we're not in lockdown. We can go out for as long as we want.
Correct.
And do anything.
So that segues, believe it or not, sort of neatly, but not entirely neatly because...
It's no segue. Stop trying to force a segue.
Well, it sort of is into our first book for the month, which is The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay. And
because of the flu pandemic thing in that book. Yes.
Yes, that was what I was working on. Yes, that's right. There's a pandemic in the novel. And I should point out, just to say ahead of time, that the book actually was published published in the UK in June, but actually in Australia, because she's an Australian writer, was published in March. So,
2020.
2020.
Yes.
So it came out on the cusp of at least, the pandemic across. I mean, obviously there'd been cases in China in December.
But this book would have been written and in production well before COVID.
Correct.
Ever made its first news report. So, she didn't write this as a response to COVID, but it was quite eerie reading, especially the early chapters where they're talking about, hearing about this pandemic happening and people aren't sure what it is, and then you have it spreading. There was some she clearly did her research quite well because it's reflected quite, or it's dovetailed nicely with how the beginning of COVID.
I want to talk about that. So, but we'll get to that. First, tell me why you chose this book, and then you can read the blurb.
Oh, no particular reason except that it was on my list of when I say list, what my list was a collection on my phone of screenshots that I'd taken of book covers that at some point had caught my eye, and I decided I wanted to read it, but because all I did was take screenshots of covers and put them in a little folder on my phone called "To Be Read," I have no idea why. In many cases, as we'll talk about at the end of this podcast, why I've chosen a particular book. So, it was in that folder. So at some point,
just to be clear, you go to bookstores and just snap photos of covers as you're walking around bookstores?
No, online. Like what would happen is I would read something. Someone would mention a book, or I'd read, something about a book, and I'd think that sounds really interesting. I should read that when I'm finished my PhD / when COVID ends / when I have somehow all the time that I'm going to dig out the back of the couch. And this was one of those books. And then it was just mentioned last month. Someone, again, I think on Facebook, mentioned that they just read it and it was really interesting.
I know who that was. Can I mention? Yeah. It was Kat Sparks.
I think actually it might have been. I think you might be right.
No, she did. She did, like a month ago. She said it was a really good book.
And because it was already I'd noted it before, it was in my mind. I went, oh, that's right, I was going to read that. And I thought, well, I will recommend it for the podcast and then I will read it. So that is the entirety of why I've chosen this particular book. It's a very highbrow reason. It's thoughtful, and I have deeply considered my choice, as you can see.
Yeah. Yes, very much so. So, and as a result, I was compelled to read it, and I'm glad I did. Because
me too.
For the most part, I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. I have some quibbles. One of them is
before we continue, shall I read?
Yes, I don't know. Yes, I know that was very bad of me. I was about to just go and launch there.
So this is the back cover copy of The Animals in That Country. Hard-drinking, foul-mouthed and allergic to bullshit, Jean is not your usual grandma. She's never been good at getting on with other humans, apart from her beloved granddaughter, Kimberly. Instead, she surrounds herself with animals, working as a guide in an outback wildlife park. And although Jean talks to all her charges, she has a particular soft spot for a young dingo called Sue. As disturbing news arrives of a pandemic sweeping the country, Jean realises this is no ordinary flu. Its chief symptom is that its victims begin to understand the language of animals, first mammals, then birds and insects too. As the flu progresses, the unstoppable voices become overwhelming and many people begin to lose their minds, including Jean's infected son, Lee. When he takes off with Kimberly heading south, Jean feels the pull to follow her kin. Setting off on their trail, with Sue the dingo riding shotgun, they find themselves in a stark, strange world in which the animal apocalypse has only further isolated people from other species. Bold, exhilarating, and wholly original, The Animals in That Country asks what would happen if, for better or worse, we finally understood what the animals were saying. Which is not bad. It maybe tells a little bit more of the plot than I would like, but it's good.
Yeah, agreed. But it's passable. it's
and I forgot the tagline, which is out on the road no one speaks, everything talks.
To me, that and maybe the first paragraph should be enough, but well, you couldn't know the first paragraph.
Not the first paragraph. You want to talk about the pandemic.
Yeah, true. So on the note of the pandemic, I just want to get this out of the way so we can get it out of the way. Yes, so it was published, as I said before, in March 2020 on the cusp. And you said it's well researched, and I would say
just from how the beginning of it kind of
the way it seeps through the media. Yeah, the first bit,
the misinformation, the rumors that are passed around, that felt very. I got deja vu.
Yes, no, you're right. Yeah. That's very good. But in terms of the epidemiology of this virus,
oh well, we're just hand waving that. That's your buy-in, as Jonathan would say. That's your buy-in. You accept that thing. That's your buy-in.
Yeah. So, well, the point I would make though is that the virus acts in this novel more like a zombie virus, in that not that people are turned into zombies, but that it has that sort of feel to it. Like, you touch someone and they're more or less infected straight away. It takes 12 or 15 hours for it to incubate.
But it's highly infectious, yes.
But yes, correct. So it has that.
Yeah.
So, and there's no talk of toilet paper runs and lockdowns and all that sort of stuff. And and this is the point I was going to make.
Because there is no lockdown.
No.
At the beginning, right?
In fact, there's no quarantine. Well, there's a few things. A, this virus moves at a gazillion, like faster than light, it seems, because society collapses pretty quickly. And to be fair, Jean's in a enclosed environment, which we'll get to in a second. But two, there's none of that sense of as bad as the world's response has been to COVID, it's nowhere near as bad as the world's response is to this virus in this book, as in, because it's non-existent, the response to
well, I'd agree with you to a certain extent, except I would say that the virus in this book, for expediency of plot, obviously, is incredibly infectious and much more than COVID. We're talking about COVID Delta on steroids. That is how quickly, and that is how
why I said it moves like a zombie plague.
So the response time is obviously there's less time to respond, and therefore the responses are less, effective, or even like I get the feeling in this book that it all happened so quickly. There was really not a lot of time to contain it or to set up quarantine. I mean,
I don't know. Look, I want to dismiss this because it's not worth derailing the entire conversation. But it's just because we're reading it 18 months into a pandemic, you can't help but if I'd read this it obviously didn't come out, but if it come out in March 2019, I wouldn't even be discussing this because. How many books have we read where viruses just move like the clappers? It's just a thing. It's a convention of this sort of novel. But you feel now 18 months later, you're thinking, oh, but wait a moment, wouldn't have – and you realise – this is the point I'm making. You realise that those questions you're asking are only because you've just experienced a pandemic, and these are questions you would never have asked prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, no, true. But also, I mean, we can't – obviously we can't substitute, time. But – You do wonder if when COVID had initially emerged, if it had the apparent infection rate of COVID Delta, whether our response would have been as effective as it has been.
Yeah,
because this is an incredibly highly infectious variant that's floating around now.
True, but as you know, the way viruses work. And we're sort of seeing this to some extent with Delta, and again, I don't really want to discuss this, but you know that the more infectious, the less deadly, and the less of the viral load. Now, that doesn't seem the case here. Now, not to say that this zoo flu is deadly.
Well, this is the thing that, what's interesting about zoo flu is it's not fatal in almost any case. What causes the fatalities are humans killing themselves. It's like the flu doesn't kill you. You get sick, but it doesn't seem the physiological symptoms don't seem any worse than a bad dose of actual influenza. The side effect of being able to understand what animals are communicating is what drives people insane and collapses the society, not the actual pandemic itself.
To finish this point, all I'm saying is that sometimes reality outstrips or outruns the fiction.
Sometimes.
Well, okay, a lot of actually every time.
Every time.
Well, and this is a book, about the Anthropocene as well, and there were plenty of those out, and we'll sort of get a feel as to how accurate they were as we go through the disaster that's coming.
If any of us survive.
Correct. I mean, you saw as we record this in Canada. They had temperatures close to 50 degrees.
North America is just not just Canada, but like the northern US states, and it's horrendous over there.
Like 15 to 16 degrees above average. It's just incredible.
It's insane.
So anyway, that's it. What I'm saying is, as you said, Jonathan Strahan would say this is the buy-in. It's allegorical anyway. This is not meant to be hard science. if you try this book again,
do not dissect how we manage to actually understand animal communication, or really interestingly, how they manage to understand us.
There is no scene 3/4 of the way through the novel where a scientist meets Jean, our main character, and says, "Well, the way the virus works is
this.
There is none of that. Do not expect it. And in fact, if it was there, it wouldn't be this novel. This novel is not aimed at that. That's not the purpose. The virus is simply a catalyst, a means to an end, to make a much broader point, which we'll get to now. Yes, I know I just spent 10 minutes discussing something that probably didn't deserve more than 60 seconds. I apologise to everyone listening to the podcast.
But I think it merits it because we always read books in context. And it's a really interesting context for this book because there would have been no thought, I assume, in the author's mind or the publisher's mind when they acquired it that, oh my God, this is going to be great. This is going to be dovetail beautifully with the. No, it's just like, this is a really cool book.
Yeah, and I think what's important is that it's not too close to home in a funny way. It is about a pandemic, but it's so clearly, and I'll only use this word a few times, allegorical, that you don't feel like, oh my God, this is my life on the page.
No.
And therefore you're resistant to the book? No, not at all. And the reason for me that you fall into this novel is because of the voice. It is brilliant, the voice. I don't know about you, Kirsten, that was my reaction from the first page. It's very raw, but very, very Aussie. So very colloquial, and I'm curious to know how international audiences approach this book. But then, given we've, as Australians, have read plenty of overseas fiction from America and England that's also very colloquial, and we've seemed to have adapted. Why can't people adapt to our colloquialisms and our ocarisms, which is what this book does?
Indeed. No, it is really good. The voice, I agree, the voice of the book is really strong. And the language shift in the book as Jean's, I guess, ability to understand creatures around her develops is really, it's subtle, but it's really well done.
Oh, that's the best part of the book. How that, well, partly, so the way she does the animal language, but also the way that what is fragmented and, in a sense, hard to understand, to a great sense, hard to understand, becomes slowly, gradually, incrementally easier for us to understand as Jean does. It's just really, it's really smart.
Jean's language doesn't evolve, but Jean's language changes too, and her sentence structures change, and she becomes, like I said, it's subtle. It's not like a really dramatic shift, but it's the way she communicates to us as readers changes as well. As she become, I guess she reflects a little bit more. Her traveling companion Sue, I think, her sentence become a bit shorter and stilted and less. I mean, not that Jean was ever flowery, but just a bit more direct and blunt, which was. It's very cool. I quite enjoyed it. So what we should say, I think it takes a while it took me a while anyway to, I guess, come to a comprehension of what was actually happening in terms of communicating with the animals, because it's not Dr. Dolittle. The animals don't just start talking like humans do, and we understand them. So they're not talking. Humans have, through this zoo flu, as it's dubbed, develop the ability to understand animal communication. So, and that comes through body language. It comes through scent. Obviously, our olfactory senses have been heightened. So we must be able to smell better in order to do this, but we're able to also process what those scents mean. But it comes through physical cues, scent, also probably some verbal, like sound as well, the noises animals make. But it's not like the animals suddenly start talking English or another human language and we can understand them. We understand how they're communicating through the ways that animals understand, which is really, really smart. And what's interesting, like you say, that it became easy to understand the animals. I don't think, without taking anything away from the author, I don't think that's something that McKay is doing. that is something our minds do. This is what our minds do. Our minds are very adept at processing language. We've got centuries and centuries and millennia of processing language and understanding it and picking it up. And if you drop a human into a country where they don't speak that language, we will pick it up very quickly, surprisingly quickly. Immersive learning is a very effective way to learn the language if you don't mind, not being able to be understood or understanding anyone for a little while to start with. So it's what our brains do. So I think as readers, I don't think McKay does anything different. She has designed this way, especially Sue, the dingo, how she will communicate, or how Jean, and therefore us, will receive her communication. And that doesn't change. She doesn't simplify it. She doesn't, make it any different so we understand it better. It's just as we read, the same way as Jean begins to understand Sue a bit more, we start to understand that language as well. But the language doesn't change. Our brains just pick up, if we let it as readers, if we're open to it and receptive and don't just go, oh, I don't understand this, it's stupid, our brains will actually, like Jean does, pick up what that communication is about. And that's what's really smart about the book, that McKay does allow us to do that as readers and doesn't explain or have Jean explain all the time exactly what Sue means, exactly what that communication is about. This is an author who has done, I think, she has done a PhD on animal communication in literature. So, yeah, she probably, I don't know, but she probably understands a little bit about how communication in human brains works as well, and was trusting us to be able to pick up what the animals were saying, even though it never approached human communication, except the fact that it is in English. So it's obviously a book in English. It's represented in English because Jean speaks English.
Yeah, and we should say that the book is set. Well, actually, it's not. I assume it's somewhere in the Northern Territory. Is that the impression?
Queensland.
Is it Queensland? Because I couldn't tell. Unless it's actually. Is it set?
It's Queensland. I'm sure it's Queensland. It felt like Queensland. It may not be. It felt like Northern Queensland, but it could. Yeah, it could be. I guess they're going down.
Well, they're north.
Do you know
Australia.
What? Yeah, it felt like Northern Queensland, but you know what? It might have just been, this is really silly, it might have just been because I coded this particular wildlife park she works at as similar to Steve Irwin's park, and that's up in Queensland. That might be all it is. I think maybe I've made that up in my head.
No,
how
that could,
interesting.
Yeah, that could be 100% right.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere north of us in Australia. So
it's in the north. I had pictured it up in North Queensland, but it could very well be the Northern Territory as well.
Yep. So, and yes, as you said, she's at a wildlife park enclosure, etc. And there's this great scene early on when the flu's starting to spread, where you can hear certain people can understand the voice of the mice that are going to be used as food for the other animals, and just how utterly shit scared they are. And it's both confronting, but it's that first time where the primal, visceral nature of these animals comes through, where it's just help, sort of help, or fear, and it comes through loud and clear, and therefore you can see how, if this thing were to be a real thing, where it would just why people would go insane. Getting that brunt, and one of the things that McKay does is that there's gradations of the virus, as there is with all viruses to an extent, and so the symptoms, like if you're understanding mammals.
Mammals.
Yeah, mammals. That's right. I was right.
That's like the first stage.
Yeah. Then you're okay-ish. Once you start to get to birds and insects, that's where it gets difficult because there's too many voices. And it becomes too hard to pass.
Yeah, so you kind of pick up that, I guess it starts with being able to understand organisms that are closer to us as organisms. So we begin with mammals and birds, reptiles, insects, and insects is like the last stage. Although I suspect plants was probably the very, very last stage, and it never got to plants.
You think plants?
Because they're an organism. They
yeah, but I saw this having a distinction between flora and fauna.
Maybe, but I don't believe there would be. Like the book doesn't get to there, but I think if you got really bad, maybe you get to understand plants as well.
Yes, if you're understanding the insects, you're in trouble because you can't escape. And this becomes a thing as well within the novel. So I think thematically the novel is about also the limits to communication and where those limits lie, because this isn't a story where understanding animals means that we've become nicer people as a result. Some people do take that route, which is great. Others go the completely opposite way. And towards the end of the novel, spoilers, we come to a community that has actually banned all animals from being there because they don't want to have a bar of it. And there's that sense that even with the communication in place, our own stubbornness, selfishness, whatever you, that's it. Those things, those attributes of ours, stops us from really understanding the animals. Jean does. Jean's not like that, but you can see that others have said no, don't care what they're saying, couldn't care less, don't want to have a part of it.
I think also there's two parts to what, the effect of the virus, and part of it is the content of the communication, sure, but I also think part of the reason why it becomes impossible to to put up with is it would be exactly the same if, let's say, a flu came along which granted humans telepathy, and every day, all you had, unless you were locked in a place by yourself, was the unwanted thoughts of every single human being around you. Imagine walking through the city and just getting, and it's not even the content, it's just the constant bombarding, kind of like social media, of the thoughts of every single person in the world, whether you want to hear them or not, whether you want to communicate or not. It's just like nothing has changed in the sense of if you walk outside, you can hear the birds, you can hear insects buzzing, you can hear birds singing, you can hear the noises of organisms around us, but we can't process them as understandable language. So it is just noise, and we can either appreciate the noise or we can block it out, and it's fine. But when it becomes language that we understand, our processing centers in our brain are not, when we're not blocking it out, it's constantly there, and our brains are trying to process this language, and it becomes really difficult. So part of it is the content, but I think a great part of the reason why it is unbearable for humans is the fact that it's just a constant overload of stuff we can't shut out. And when it becomes insects as well, it's just like, as I said, I think that effect would be the same if it was a different effect and we could just understand the thoughts of every human being. And it was a constant bombardment that we had to try to deal with and get through.
I really like that.
There's that part of it.
I really like that. I think, I really like that. I read it as that it's the guilt.
Oh yeah, there's like the content of the communication is a big part of it too, but I think the insanity is really from the constant inescapable, unless you reject other organisms in your community, bombardment of this, but also the fact that we get to hear what pigs on a truck going to the slaughterhouse are thinking. We get to understand what animals are feeling in their lives.
But what I found interesting is that the idea is that we don't lean into the guilt and go, wow, we're going to change the way we act. Humanity goes, or some parts of it go, that's horrible. I don't want to hear that. And I'm not going to change the way I do things. I'm just going to get rid of the thing that's causing my pain.
Isn't that what we do now?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's exactly exactly.
Like
exactly.
Do we have to hear what a chicken is thinking to know that a battery hen is in misery, and yet we still buy caged
No,
hens?
but it's much but obviously
but it's no different. Like it's blatant in this book, but that's all this book is doing. This book is just but we all the time. We know, like, and everybody knows that the things that we do in our lives cause pain and suffering to other
I agree with
animals and human beings in the world, and we go, never mind, I want my 10-cent egg.
The point is no matter how blatant it is, how it's shoved down our throat, it is a good chunk of us just go, I'm still going to eat chicken, I'm still going to eat cows, pigs. I mean, I'm a carnivore, so I'm part of the problem. But it doesn't matter how blatant it is. We are. It doesn't matter.
So why would it? My question is, why would it change? Is because we understand in human language these things. Like, why would it change?
No, well, because we all have this naive, or no, not we. I have this naive thought that a bit like if God was came down from the mountain and said, "Hello, everyone, here I am. I'm God." Society would change because wow, God's a thing. But God had come down, and we'd go, "Well, that's interesting. Can you piss off? Because I've got better things to do." And that's just us, isn't it? It doesn't matter what once we've got in our mind our thoughts and our views of the world, it's near impossible to shift us, no matter what occurs around us, no matter what the evidence, no matter how blatant.
I don't think it is near impossible. Actually, I think one of the things. Look, I like this book. I enjoyed reading it. There were some very clever things she did, and particularly around language and communication. And I really loved it. I will get to the ending. I was highly disappointed in the ending, but we'll get to that. But what I didn't like so much is that it's a very pessimistic book, and I'm getting a little tired of pessimism. I don't think it's useful or helpful. And I don't. I mean, look, this virus.
Isn't this what you're seeing in the world? Because I actually saw an interesting review of a completely different book, Kim Stanley Robinson's latest, Ministry for the Future. And I saw a review, which I haven't read, okay, but I did sneak a review of it, which said, because it's quite an optimistic take, at least it recognises that the Anthropocene is going to cause major pain and damage, but it has an optimistic element to it. And the reviewer in this case was saying that doesn't resonate with their lived experience, that there is any optimism around the corner. And I see it with a book like this and other novels I've read that deal with the Anthropocene, that why would you feel optimistic? What evidence is there that, or not even optimistic, but less pessimistic? What evidence is there that we're going to change our ways? Is there anything?
Yeah, there is evidence. And I think this is the problem. If we just throw up our hands and say, well, what's the point? It's all fucked. Then absolutely nothing's going to change. Absolutely nothing's going to get solved. I guarantee you that if we don't try, nothing will happen. Definitely, 100%. You're spot on, and that's the problem, because there is nothing is going to get fixed. It's not about being Pollyanna. It's about doing what we can to mitigate the situation that we're in, and we have to. What's really interesting is, I think as human beings, we get a lot of input in how we view the world. And some of that input is from being in the world and seeing firsthand what people do and talking to people and understanding what they're thinking and feeling and why they do things. But that is a small fraction of our input that helps build our worldview. And a lot of it will be from not direct experience. A lot of it for people who consume fictional media will be from fictional constructions of the world. And our brains cannot process these any differently to how we process actual things. If we meet a character in a book, our brains process that character as though they're a real human being. And what's kind of disturbing is, for people who read a lot, we are going to, quote unquote, meet a lot more fictional people, and we're going to have the impression that we understand them more intimately because of the way books are written, especially if they're first person point of view, than we do actual people. And our perceptions of how human beings are and what they think is inseparable from real human beings and fictional human beings. Our brains literally process them exactly the same way. So we build our schema of what humans are mostly from fiction. And that's kind of scary in a way, because it's not actually how people are. It's not. It's really not. I'm thinking of in my life, it's sort of like when I wrote my PhD, and my PhD was about female friendships and female antagonism, right? Yep. And of course, the whole thing about, well, of course women hate women. Of course we do. We're horrible to each other. We undercut, we're bitchy. This is the perception of, women can't ever really be friends, right? There's always this frenemy, this thing which doesn't apply to male friendships at all. But when I sit back and think about my life, I don't know any women like that for the most part. Maybe one or two. For the most part, I have positive female relationships in my life. And I'm not saying that, again, it's not Pollyanna. It's not like, oh, no, actually women are wonderful. No, of course. But women are humans. So humans can be awful to each other or humans can be wonderful to each other. But on balance, the female relationships in my life are positive. So why do I carry around with me this idea that women can't really be friends? And women, women are bitchy to each other and can't really be trusted, and they're like cats in a bag. Like, why do I have that? It doesn't come from my life, and it never has. And this is what I'm saying about, if we say, well, isn't this how humans are? This is just what humans do. Like, then we're just throwing up our hands.
Okay, so for me,
and we have a responsibility not to throw up our hands. I had a conversation at a dinner a few years ago with someone who was going, well, you know what? If it's the end of the world, and he wasn't saying this, it was like a thought experiment. If there's nothing we can do, and it's all fucked, right? And it's going to come crashing down in a century or less, and that's it. And there's literally nothing we can do. Then why don't we just live the best lives we can now? Why don't we just burn all the fossil fuels? Why don't we just do, because it's going to end anyway. So why don't we just have this party? Why make our lives, small and miserable just because we'll eke out a few more years? Let's just have the party and have fun, and then it's over. And which is a really tempting mind view. But of course, unlike a party where when it's over, you go home, there's no home to go to. And also it's a complete denial and abdication of our responsibility to those who come after. We don't get to trash the house everybody else needs to come and live in. We just don't get to do that. And we don't get to trash it for animals. We don't get to trash it for ourselves. We don't get to trash it for future generations. We don't get to say, well, it's all going to be shit, so why bother? Like, fuck that. That is just, fuck it.
So these climate change novels are not doing us any favours.
It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act between saying, things are not good and we need to start doing stuff seriously because we're running out of time for for various tipping points, and throwing up the hands. Like, it's a balancing act, and I deeply admire novelists and artists who are walking this tightrope and trying to write books which are, it's a horrible phrase, but cautionary tales, but not tipping people into despair and outright pessimism, and nothing's going to help anyway, so why do we even bother?
And I suppose this segues into the ending, which is what you have an issue with, and I assume it's because a vaccine is found.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's such an easy fix. And I know, look, I'm happy to hand wave a lot of this stuff.
But you mean fix in a very different way than what you've just spent the last 5 minutes discussing.
Yeah, exactly.
Fix within the confines and the plot of the novel. That is, that people will be cured from zoo flu. But the broader issue,
and be no longer able to understand animal communication.
But the broader concern around what we're doing to our natural world, that obviously is not fixed in this novel. This novel provides no response to that at all, which is the point you're making. Okay, I can see that. Yeah,
and it's a nice look. It's like I was disappointed in the ending for it felt too neat, but also within the book it just felt way too neat. And it's literally a pill that Sue is forced to ingest. Well, forced maybe. That starts working like immediately. So even though we're going to hand wave how the virus works, I'm not willing to hand wave how human digestion works. And you don't take a pill. It's not even an intravenous injection. It's literally a pill that she's taking, and within minutes she cannot understand Sue anymore. Like, not even probably minutes. Like, it happens really quickly. It's like,
I don't think it happens that quickly. I felt that maybe
it begins to happen incredibly, and I just thought, oh, come on.
Yeah.
But also the bigger picture of like, oh, we have this, and Sue is definitely pressured, by the military into taking this pill, but also she, there is a willingness. She's happy to be forced. Put it that way. I got the impression she's happy to be forced to take the pill, right, and not to have to mull too much about whether she wants to or not. And it's just like, I don't know. We do spoil books, people, so you've been warned. So the very last bit where there's this like tinge with kind of quasi regret or sadness that, and like a wish that maybe she hadn't, and that she would still like to understand Sue. It's like, I don't know. If that's what it was driving at, to have this final scene, I don't think it was worth it. I think she could have been having a lot of these thoughts and things, and we don't end the book with oh, now they've found a cure. It felt like a really easy way out.
It's funny because we've spoken the last half hour or so about the voice of the novel, about the mechanics of the novel. One thing we haven't really spoken about, which is related to what you've just said, is some of the character stuff with Jean herself, and she's chasing after her granddaughter and the revelations about that, and her son. And I found, and the reason I haven't raised any of this is because I found all that to be not dull or uninteresting, but just it felt irrelevant to an extent.
I agree. I think the revelations, and we won't say what these are, but the revelations around Kimberly.
That's the granddaughter.
The granddaughter were a bit. It went into melodrama, and I went, it's not needed. It detracts from, I guess, the core themes or what I felt for me were the core themes and concerns of the book.
Like a novel that is essentially a road trip with an older woman and a dingo is terrific.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that second half is great because of that. But all the sort of subplot stuff around her son and Chase, and the guilt that she has.
It wasn't needed. Like chasing her son to get her granddaughter back because her son has
absconded with her,
kidnapped, abducted the granddaughter. Not in a traumatic way for the granddaughter, I don't think. But this is the thing that he was estranged from his former partner, the girl's mother, and he came back to the wildlife park infected with zoo flu, got himself infected the park that was until then safe, quote unquote, and then promptly took his granddaughter to drive down and see the whales in the Bight.
Which does, I should say, end with a terrific set piece, but I won't say anything about it.
Yes, it does. I like the whales. And that's enough. That's enough to get, Jean and Sue on the road, and there's beautiful, heartbreaking interchanges between Jean and Sue about what family is and what kin is and what's important, and there's this wonderful scene where and my heart broke for Sue, and I just hated Jean for 2 minutes deeply because she's. And when I say talking, they're not. Well, Jean talks, and Sue kind of can understand her, obviously, to some extent, and of course, Jean can understand what Sue is communicating. But they're not like they're not talking English at each other again, But Jean is saying she needs to go. She needs to keep going and find her because she needs to find Kimberly, the girl's family. She needs to keep going, and Sue is sort of speaking or communicating about how she essentially, if it was a human conversation, Jean would be saying, I need to keep going and find Kimberly. She's my family, and they're the only family I have, right? Kimberly's the only family I have. I need to keep going and find her. And Sue's saying, well, but I'm here. You're not alone. And she's saying, yeah, but you're not family. And you just, oh my God, it's awful. And Sue is heartbroken and goes off for a bit, and it's the most beautifully rendered scene, and there are bits like that all through the novel where there are these very surprising and thought-provoking ways of expressing what Sue is feeling and what her worldview is, and the human dog relationship, because Sue also isn't pure dingo. She's a Kelpie cross dingo. She's very much dingo, but there is domestic dog in her, so there is some domestic traits that she has, and the human dog relationship is beautifully wrought, I thought, because it's a very complex relationship, and it's just wonderfully done, and the ebb and flow between the power balance and the hierarchy between Jean and Sue is really nicely done as well.
But then you have a tangent where Jean goes off the beaten track to reacquaint herself with her ex.
And that's just like, why?
And why is everyone in the same linear direction?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Humans do often.
No, but it just feels a bit. There's a convenience to it as well.
It is convenient, but no, I did feel all of that stuff around. We're not going to spoil, but all of that was unnecessary, and it just went into melodrama, and I just thought it's just not. It wasn't needed. Like, it was enough. What you had set up was enough. We didn't have to have these little reveals, which were like, really though. What I liked about a lot of the book was essentially the very mundane human relationships and activities. It was like there was nothing to begin with. There was nothing like spectacular about that. It was just, very common, everyday, how human beings live and interact with each other. And I thought it was very well drawn, the relationship between Jean and her former daughter-in-law and Kimberly, and the tensions between those three people. Very well done. The relationships between the humans in the wildlife park and their internal politics, beautifully drawn. The humans she meets on the road. All these things they were just very ordinary human interactions, and I thought they were well done. And then it did tip over into this melodramatic sort of territory and took away from that.
And I think that's there to indicate, that which gets to the point that you made before, that Jean loses everything,
yeah,
and including her connection with Sue, and it just adds to that final bit of misery at the end of the book.
Yeah,
and you think, okay, and I thought, yeah, okay, that just seems a bit, meh. You haven't stuck the landing here.
It felt like she didn't stick the landing. That's exactly how it felt. And it's not my book. I didn't write it, but I would have preferred an ending that was just more open. Like, it's not cured. We haven't resolved how we're going to interact in this brave new world, and maybe some signaling towards some suggestions of where we might go. But I really felt like the way this book had developed and what it was talking about and how it was representing communication and human-animal interaction, and I'm uncomfortable even saying that as a divide, because one of the things this book constantly reinforces that human beings are animals. It's not human and animal; it's humans as an animal, and a pretty bad animal. When it comes down to it, we're not very good at we're extremely good at surviving with all our accoutrements. We're not very good as just animals without all of the stuff we have developed for ourselves. All of those concerns of the book, I felt there was just a door shut on them at the end with this cure.
Yeah,
and it's like,
agreed.
Really, like, why? It just felt like, wasn't this an interesting discussion we're having? Okay, close the door. Let's just go back to life now. And I felt that ending did a disservice to the rest of the book, and it made me quite, as I said, I was disappointed. It's it's a very disappointing ending for me. Other people may love it, but it was, for me, a bit disappointing.
Kirsten, a book that doesn't shut the door on its ending and very much keeps it open?
What is that?
That would be Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon.
It's a good book, isn't it? It's such an interesting book to read alongside The Animals in That Country as well. I actually read it first. I read it first, and then I read The Mackay.
I did it the other way around, and I don't know how we seem to luck into finding these books that have these connections.
We don't luck in, Ian. This is what human beings do. We find patterns. We find connections. That's how our minds work. So we arbitrarily put two things together, and it's like, hey, what's the connection?
But that's not how I think. But you're right. Because they're both books about the natural world in some way, or have a very, very descriptive and deep focus on the natural world. But Sorrowland was the book I chose.
Mm-hmm. And why did you choose it?
Because I've read some of their other work, including their debut novel, An Unkindness of Ghosts, which came out back in 2017. And for Locus, I actually reviewed a novella, The Deep, which they actually wrote in collaboration with the rap group Clipping. That's actually a really interesting book, The Deep, and I highly recommend it because it's a sort of a book of iterations of interpretation on interpretation, and yeah, it's well worth finding. And So is their debut novel is certainly worth seeking out. But I would say that Sorrowland is, for me, as given I've read other works, is that sign of extra maturity of a writer. It's that next level up in terms of and let's be clear, River's debut was terrific, but Sorrowland is just another level up. And it just really excites me to see that, and to see that, because what's next is the question you want to ask. Like, what does this author have coming out next? Because they're already showing this amazing improvement's not the right word, but maturity and development. Yeah, exactly. So I'll read the back cover blurb and then we shall discuss. So, Vern, 7 months pregnant and desperate to escape the strict religious compound where she was raised, flees for the shelter of the woods. There she gives birth to twins and plans to raise them far from the influence of the outside world. But even in the forest, Vern is a hunted woman. Forced to fight back against the community that refuses to let her go, she unleashes incredible brutality far beyond what a person should be capable of, her body racked by inexplicable and uncanny changes. To understand her metamorphosis and to protect a small family, Vern has to face the past and, more troublingly, the future outside the woods. Finding the truth will mean uncovering the secrets of the compound she fled, but also the violent history in America that produced it. So, Kirsten, what was your thoughts? Not of the back cover blurb, which is all right, which is good. That's actually a really good one.
It is a good one.
But more generally.
I loved this book. And I just had to go back and check because it's been a few weeks since I finished it, because I couldn't remember whether it was a first or third person narrative. It's third person, but the reason I couldn't remember is it's such a direct third person. It's wholly Vern. It's her point of view. It's her sensory input. It's her language. It's how she sees the world. It's how she expresses herself. And it's deeply, deeply, deeply immersive in her.
There is one minor shift, did you notice, where the story, and you might have forgotten, the story shifts into Howling's point of view for a chapter.
Oh, yeah. No, I had forgotten. And that was strange. I had forgotten it. I liked that bit in itself. I liked that as a piece of writing, and it was really neat to have that other voice.
And then late in the novel, there's also probably my favourite bit of the book, actually, because I love this sort of thing. There's a point where at the very end we get this sort of biography of Vern's mother, and it's odd because it happens in the last. Well, it's not odd. It's actually perfectly placed because a major thing has occurred, and it's this pause, but it's this amazing little capsule. It could actually be its own short story of how what really how Vern's mother got involved in this Caneland.
It's kind of like Vern's Genesis story. I guess.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and it's just this, again, it's another shift from that very intense voice that we get throughout the novel. And again, by the way, patterns, both these books, voice is number one. Voice is key. Voice is king.
And even when you have those shifts outside of, I guess, Vern's perspective in third person, the voices change and become more germane to the character that they're then representing the point of view of, which is really, really cool. But I'd actually forgotten Howling's bit. You're right. And it was a surprise, but it was so beautifully written, and it was a neat way of showing Vern from the outside and showing us things that we wouldn't otherwise necessarily notice straight away.
Yeah, and the reason I believe Rivers does it is, remember, that scene happens once they've left the forest. So we should say that the way the book is structured is it begins in an extraordinary piece where Vern almost casually gives birth to twins in the forest and then somehow impossibly escapes, although it makes more sense as the book goes on.
Right. Yeah.
As someone who's chasing after her, like you think, wow, that's what that just happened there. That's not possible. This must be a dream. Nope, it happened.
But because it was so impossible, and the book, even at that early stage, had hooked me and had already developed this trust that the author knew what they were doing, I just went, okay, that's impossible, but so something's going on here.
Yep. Exactly.
It wasn't like, oh God, that's ridiculously impossible, I'm bored. It was like, that's impossible. What is happening?
That's right. And then the book spends literally 4 years in the forest as Vern, who is well educated in flora and fauna.
And she's 15, 16.
Yeah, she's 15.
When the book opens, when she gives birth.
It's essentially, her and her two children, and you'll note I will not gender them in this, and that's deliberate. Although they are described as he in the book, so it's one of those interesting. But I'll say two twins, her twins, live in the forest for 4 years, and then they leave because for plot related reasons. Vern is is becoming sicker. There's something that's in her that's making her sicker. That metamorphosis that the back cover blurb refers to. So that's when the Howling chapter kicks in, and it's when they're at a store, I think, for clothing. Well, no, it's also when they're walking from that. I think, no, they've just escaped the store and they're walking, and Howling's noticing this new world around him or them. And it's an interesting. It's just that interesting contrast because, of course, Vern knows the world to a degree, knows what cars are. So this was just to provide that contrast, which to me, I'm willing to give that flip works. It works for that reason.
Yeah, and they're as you say, it takes place at a juncture of the narrative, and so that and later on when we get the bit about Vern's mother, they're like these little hinge pieces.
They're interludes to a degree.
Interludes, yeah. And they usher you out of one part and into another and give the reader like a pause. It's like it's a definite break in the narrative where you get to kind of reassess where you are and where you're going. And I think they're well done. And I think the use of them is well done. I think they're exceptionally written, both of them.
Yeah, agreed. And so that's the general structure of the novel. What I found interesting about this book,
so it's also kind of a road trip, but for the most part, not in a vehicle.
It is a road trip. What I found interesting is that it's a book that is in no hurry to get anywhere specifically. I think it is deliberately paced in a very measured way, to the extent that the action-packed ending, while very successful, you feel it's not rushed. I don't want to say the word rushed. You might have felt that, but you feel like I could have. It felt like that Rivers needed to have. We've got to end the book. The book has to end. There has to be a conclusion.
Yeah.
So this is what happens, and this is how it ends, and it's all very well done. But it's so beautifully set up. Both in the forest, I felt a pang when they left the forest because I loved all the forest stuff. And by the way, I'm not a natural. I will not go camping. If it doesn't have internet, I'm not involved at all. And if it doesn't have toilets or internet,
if you have to shit in the woods,
it ain't happening. But it's so evocative in this book that I thought, wow, well, okay, well, if I had Vern by my side, maybe I would, live out in the forest. And then when they go and to the town that they end up in and meet the characters there, you just don't want them to leave that experience either. Yeah. But the plot has to. There's a plot. There's a story, and it has to happen. So it's just one of those books. Did you get the same feel? Like it's just you wish they could stay where they are, and that the plot would just go away and just vanish into the.
I think because we. At least for me, but hopefully for a lot of other readers too, the way we're dropped into Vern's world and the world of her children, we develop a fairly deep attachment to them pretty quickly. So we just want them to be safe.
Yeah, that's right.
Like that's it. We just want the best for them. And when they're in the forest, it feels like it's the best for them and they're safe until things happen. And then when they go on the road and they meet up or join, like become a family unit with some other
Bridget.
people.
It's with Bridget and Gogo.
They feel like they're in a safe place that's comfortable for them.
And Vern starts a relationship with Gogo, and it's fractious.
It feels like they're in a good place, and we don't want them to have to leave that place. But then something happens, and they have to go. And I think that's what it is, because we're so attached to these people. We just want the best for them. We don't want them to have to go through shit and trouble, and we just want them to be safe. And I think that's why it is. It's why we feel kind of torn along with them away from these places, because we didn't want to leave, but we didn't want them to have to leave. We wanted them to be safe and to put down roots.
And that's one of the themes of the novel, this idea of safe. It's also a book about family as well, but it's also very much. But it's a book that because we find out that the compound, the religious cult Caneland that Vern was brought up in, is actually, it's not spelled, well, more sort of is spelled out. It's essentially a CIA FBI front. So I've used both because that's exactly how it's described. It's one or the other. So the CIA or the FBI or some other black ops group in America.
And is it because I'm not sure I caught it, or whether Caneland was set up that way, or whether it was a genuine African American nationalist breakaway that was infiltrated.
The impression I got is that it was initially set up as that. It was called Claws, as a bit like the Black Panthers, a nationalist movement, but it was infiltrated like within about 3 minutes. It's very quickly infiltrated. So whatever dreams and views that they had, that was quickly subverted into experimentation. And this is one of the real themes. And Rivers evokes and expresses. It doesn't just evoke it, says it. You know, things like the Tuskegee study and other experiments on people of colour and specifically Black Americans for the last 200 years. And you know, it's so timely. Again, not necessarily written for the pandemic. It's hard not to think that everything somehow has been written as a response to the pandemic, even though books are planned 3 years in advance, or whatever. But given the hesitancy of vaccine uptake in certain communities in America at the moment, and Indigenous communities and people of colour, and it's because of this very reason, a group of people that were experimented on by governments, white people, to put it simply, and it just resonates throughout this whole book, and it's just brilliantly done.
No, I mean, when you have a government that has, abused and carried out abuses against your family and your people historically, it is hard to trust the current iteration of that government.
Yeah, and, exactly.
And the current governments continue to carry out abuses. Like, I mean, the Australian government is continuing to carry out what started as the intervention in First Nations communities here under John Howard continues to operate in various iterations. In our country, in Australia, the various metrics of health and well-being, there is a disgraceful divide between white Australians, to put it very broadly, and Indigenous communities on all metrics, income, health, mortality, employment, like any metric you name, there is a disgraceful divide. So it is hard when you the government of a country that you might not even recognise as your government is telling you to trust us. You completely understand why some people be like, yeah, but really, should we? Because you haven't shown yourself to be trustworthy and caring about us until now. So we don't trust you. And it is beautifully and subtly threaded through Sorrowland that this is the experience of this particular group of people in this country.
And Vern herself...
Actually, you know what? I'm going to walk that back. It is not subtly done. It is explicitly done through the book. There are many sections of very explicit rhetoric about what has happened to Black people and what continues to happen to Black people in America, much of which, carried out by, or at least tolerated by, the government.
Yeah, so I agree. I don't think it's subtle. It's not subtle at all. But then that's good. This is not a time for subtlety on those sorts of issues. And then Vern herself is she's albino and has the disabilities that comes with that, especially around her eyesight.
And so does one of her twins.
Feral has the same, and that's also played beautifully. And because the thing that's what's interesting is that it's a fungus. Spoilers.
It's a fungus.
There's some. We don't really know what fungus. I just kept thinking of Jeff Vandermeer because everything to do with fungi reminds me of Jeff Vandermeer.
There is a symbiote that has been encouraged, and I say symbiote because it does seem not to be parasitic by the if it connects with the right human being, it will have a symbiotic effect rather than a parasitic effect.
Yeah,
and that's what it has with Vern.
And what it does is essentially make her into a super soldier. It's Captain America, but just in the worst possible way, because it creates an exoskeleton once it's fully formed that she can unfurl and use it to shield herself from bullets and that sort of stuff.
It just reminded me in my head partially like how I was kind of picturing as quasi kind of like the alien from Alien,
yes,
the Alien movies.
It's got that Geiger-esque quality, to it, very bony ligature, that sort of thing. But if I'm not mistaken, Vern's eyesight doesn't improve.
No. She's still very much, her poor eyesight and pigmentation as well. That follows through because I believe, I didn't go back and read it carefully, but I had the impression that Vern, like her exoskeleton, everything, it is pale. Like she is pale, whereas, and I don't want to spoil things too much, but the other character we meet with a similar condition is dark, as her skin is dark. So
yes,
can't 100% vouch for that. I'm sorry, Rivers, if I've misunderstood that, but in my head, that's how I've pictured these two. So her intrinsic physical characteristics as Vern continue. She has poor eyesight because of her albinism. She has a lack of melanin in her skin, so she's pale. And that does continue. She's not this process with the fungus is not a cure for her intrinsic physical condition.
Yeah, but I just found it so novel is not a great word, but it's a super soldier narrative, although we don't really figure that out towards to the last third, where the super soldier element isn't, as you said, it's not a panacea, it doesn't cure everything. The inherent, her issues are still her issues. She still is, and therefore she's still very much Vern as we know Vern. There's talk that the fungus is making her more of a monster, but you never
stronger and she heals incredibly quickly, and she's potentially functionally immortal.
Yes, correct. The character who you don't want to spoil, the way that person has interacted with their fungus has made them more beast-like, but then they're treated like a beast, treated.
I don't see. Yeah, see, I would disagree strongly with that. I don't believe it is the fungus and that process.
No, I said they're treated. They're literally shackled.
Yeah, I believe it's how they've been treated. That is the fungus hasn't made them beast-like. They have been treated as a beast, and psychologically they have responded accordingly.
Yeah, and that's right. Agreed. Yes, I may not have expressed it that well, but look, and that's some of the. It's not. There's so many layers in this novel, is what I'm trying to get to. That there's so many things going on, and generally when an author has this much happening, whether it's about experimentation on people of colour, or whether it's about the treatment of governments on Indigenous Americans, or whether it's about albinism, or whether it's about any other of the natural world, which is
gender and sexuality, because that's the key theme,
or gender and sexuality. You'd think, well, that's a large brew. That's a big stew there with lots of stuff in it. How can all of it come through and have a voice? And yet it all does. All of it does brilliantly.
Because you know what? I think reading books like Sorrowland, where it is like a whole bunch of important things that are being framed and talked about and dissected, it makes me less, I think it makes me more impatient about other books that have a very narrow focus, because you know what, that's not what we get in
But
life.
everyone's told that first authors, they throw the kitchen sink in and you've got to pare back. You've got to pare back, Kirsten.
But why, when this is what our lives are. Our lives are juggling a million different things at once. And we can't just say, I'm just going to focus on this now, because we don't get to do that. And I think books like Sorrowland are more reflective of the way we inhabit our bodies and our world, because we have all these competing things. It reminds me of the old chestnut, which hopefully is an old chestnut for most people, where the idea is your protagonist should be universal, because if your book is about government tyranny, that's what you're writing about. And if you have a character who's not a straight white male, then that complicates things, and then you're not focused on government tyranny. And if your book is about relationships between men, then you don't even have to mention women, because that's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on the relationships between men. And in that, here's something from Left of Center, that Brad Pitt movie about, he comes back and his death manifests. It's got Anthony Hopkins in it as well. And
Meet Joe Black.
Meet Joe Black.
Are you bringing Meet Joe Black into this podcast?
Yes, I am, because one of the critiques around Meet Joe Black at the time, which I thought was a very valid critique, was that, death comes back and he inhabits this body that gets to be super, well, Joe Black himself isn't super wealthy, but he's, the world that death comes back to see whether human beings get to, die or not, and how they're treated is among the uber wealthy, people who don't have concerns about money. It was an unrealistic depiction of actually how humans are when they don't have financial concerns and all the stresses that go along with that. And the comeback to that was, yes, but this is a way of actually just looking at human beings and how we can be without all the stresses, and what the ideal human can be like without all of that. And it's that's just bullshit, because that isn't true. You can't look at one aspect of someone in isolation and say, well, this is what works, because you have to take all the other factors into account. And I'm getting more and more enamored of these books, which could be described as messy and baroque and sprawling and whatever other thing you want to say, because it has so many things in there. And actually that's important, because you can't look at one element of the world and say, we're just going to focus on this, because that element is intersected by all these other facets, right? Like government experimentation on people intersects with matters of class and race, and yes, with gender. There's economic factors that come into it. There's the industrial military complex, of course, factors into it. And how much money does the government spend on its military? That's how much money it has to do other things. I mean, it's complicated.
And there's that brilliant tension between the natural world and the modern world that we see throughout the novel.
And you can't leave any of these factors aside and have, I think, a really robust discussion of any of your themes.
Yeah, you could see an editor saying, well, okay, I get what you're doing, but can we maybe don't have the albinism? That's one thing too far.
And sure, you could have taken it out and it wouldn't have made, for the narrative, it wouldn't have made much difference. There's no key point, really, where Vern's poor eyesight has a hinging role to play, right? There's no key point to it. There's some talk about how her pale skin sets her apart from her black community, but it's not a big deal is made of it. It's not a major thing. So sure, you could take the albinism out of it. Wouldn't really hurt the plot, but it would hurt the book.
Yeah, it's not as a rich a stew.
And this is it. It is not just the idea that something like a person who has albinism isn't important is awful. Like, why not? Why can't you have a character who is an albino and still talk about other things? Why should that be a distraction?
Yep.
But this is what we kind of have got ourselves into, like we've painted ourselves into this corner, the idea that if you're talking about a big important thing, nothing should distract from that big important thing. And all these side issues about, gender and race and ability, and that's a distraction. It's not a distraction.
You can add them in. No, Kirsten, you can add them in as long as they dovetail neatly with the overall theme.
But why are they less of a distraction than a character happens to be? It's a rhetorical question. But why is the fact that a character is a potentially non-binary albino woman more of a distraction than a character who is a white cis male? Why is that more of a distraction? It shouldn't be. It's just this is what this person is. But that is the corner
because Vern is not the default. That's why.
And that is the problem. And if we had more and more characters who were not the default, we wouldn't even be thinking about this stuff.
If you're going to write about about a character that's not the default, then the story needs to focus on the fact that they're not the default. Yeah. And that's not what this novel does. And brilliantly doesn't do that. It's part of Vern. It's not ignored, and it's not conveniently ignored for the sake of the plot, which sometimes happens.
No.